Welcome, my bountiful friends. It's time to put on your whites, your bowler hat and your bother boots, because today we're going to be getting super sharp in our Gullivers over the old paper wapery kneegers. We're going to be delving deep into Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange. Just like the last video on Great Expectations, this one also features a young man who must master his inner self, but this fella is certainly no Pip. Will he finally learn to control his youthful impulses and become a respectable member of society? What are this book's themes? What was its impact on literature and how does it fare today? As usual, I'll be diving in deep, and as always, there will be as many spoilers as there are broken heads. And there will be plenty of opinions. Oh, so many lovely, lovely opinions. So you have been warned, my brother. And before we begin in earnest, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. Anthony Burgess wrote A Clockwork Orange in early 1961, shortly after return to England from his time as a colonial education officer in Malaya and Brunei. It was conceived during a turbulent period in his life. He had spent several years abroad and was struck by the language and cultural changes in Britain upon his return. The rise of youth subcultures, including teddy boys and the emerging mods and rockers, fascinated him. He saw a growing trend of juvenile delinquency, which, combined with his interest in linguistics and dystopian themes, inspired the novel. He was diagnosed with a terminal illness, which later proved to be a misdiagnosis. However, it did prompt him to write prolifically, and he completed the novel in a mere 3 weeks. He also claimed that part of his motivation for writing the novel stemmed from a traumatic event involving his first wife, Llewellyn Lynn Jones. He alleged that she had been attacked by drunk off-duty American soldiers during World War II, an incident that deeply affected him and can be seen clearly reflected in the story's harrowing depiction of a home invasion. Getting it published was relatively straightforward. It was published on March 17, 1962 by William Heinemann in the United Kingdom. At that time, Heinemann was a well-established publishing house known for releasing literary fiction. The book was later published in the United States by W. Norton, though, notedly, the American edition controversially omitted the final chapter, which depicted Alex's eventual rejection of violence. Burgess was frustrated by this editorial decision, as he felt that it misrepresented his intended message. It wasn't until 1986 that the full version was published in the US, restoring Burgess's original ending. Alexander Delarge, aka Alex, is the narrator and protagonist of the novel. He's a charismatic and violent teenage gang leader, and we experience the world through his eyes, both the highs and the lows. George, aka Georgie, is one of Alex's original droogs. He's ambitious, but objects to being under Alex's increasingly restraining leadership. He symbolises rebellion within rebellion, and his actions trigger the internal coup that weakens Alex's control. Pete is another droog, but more passive and less sadistic than the others. He is later seen as reformed and settled, and represents a possible normal path, a passing through youth to normal adulthood. Dim is the muscle of the group, dull-witted and brutal. Eventually he becomes a police officer, which is a dark irony in the novel. He symbolises systematic violence. P.R. Deltoid is Alex's juvenile probation officer. He's patronising and ineffective in controlling or steering Alex's wayward behaviour. He represents the ineffectiveness of the system and failed institutional oversight. And his name suggests that he's old muscle, or perhaps the old way of doing things, and that the Ludovico technique is there to replace his old way of doing things. The prison chaplain is one of the few sympathetic adult characters in the novel, and he advocates for spiritual growth over state-imposed reform. He raises the central moral question: is a man who chooses evil still morally superior to one who is forced to be good? Dr. Brodsky is a scientist who administers the Ludovico technique to Alex. His own words suggest very clearly that he cares very little for the effects on a person's health or their character. He's only interested in the utilitarian effect and the political gain that it delivers. He personifies cold state-sponsored psychological control. F. Alexander is a writer and political dissident. He's the victim of Alex's earlier horrendous home invasion, and he later attempts to use Alex as a symbol of state oppression. However, when he learns Alex's true identity, he then drives the reformed thug into attempting suicide, which asks the question whether vengeance is the same thing as justice, and it also asks if a liberal will abandon their own liberal values if they are themselves personally injured. In a dystopian future where society is plagued by youth violence and government control, Alex, a charismatic yet sadistic teenager, leads a gang of delinquents, Dim, Georgie and Pete, in committing acts of what they call ultra-violence. They engage in brutal assaults, theft and sexual violence, all while indulging in drug-laced milk at the Korova milk bar. Alex has a deep love for classical music, particularly Beethoven, and he narrates the story in Nadsat, a fictional slang that blends English Cockney slang with Russian influences. Alex's gang turns against him after he asserts dominance over them one time too many, and they set him up during a home invasion, which leads to his arrest. In prison, he initially struggles but later manipulates the system by feigning reform. He is selected for an experimental rehabilitation program called the Ludovico technique, which is designed to condition criminals' minds to be repulsed by violence. The treatments involve forcing Alex to watch violent films while being injected with drugs that induce extreme nausea. Over time, he develops an involuntary aversion to violence, sex, and even his beloved Beethoven music. Upon release, he finds himself powerless in a world that once feared him. He is unable to defend himself when he is attacked by his former victims, including a homeless man he beat up, and his old gang members who have, ironically enough, all become police officers. Seeking refuge, he unknowingly ends up at the home of Mr. Alexander, a writer whose wife he assaulted years earlier during a home invasion. Mr. Alexander is at first unaware of Alex's identity and sees him as a victim of government oppression, and plans to use him as a political tool against the state. However, when he discovers Alex's real identity, he forces him to listen to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which triggers unbearable pain due to his conditioning. Driven to despair, Alex attempts suicide by jumping out of a window. Alex survives the fall, and in the hospital, doctors reverse his conditioning, restoring his ability to make choices once more. In the final chapter, he begins to grow weary of his violent lifestyle and considers settling down, which suggests that his criminal tendencies may merely have been a phase of his youth. The novel is distinguished by a highly inventive and highly stylized prose that makes it a unique and enjoyable reading experience. Its most striking feature is its use of nadsats, which uses a hybrid Cockney slang with Shakespearean flourishes and Russian loanwords. Drug means friends, Gulliver means head, Horoshaw means great, and Bog means God. This new language creates a rhythmic, hypnotic effect and mirrors the chaotic and unpredictable nature of the novel's world. Burgess, a trained linguist, crafted the language to serve as both a barrier and an immersive tool. It initially alienates the reader but gradually draws them into Alex's warped perspective. It is also a hallmark of its futuristic setting. Language evolves over time. The common English in usage during the 1960s is not the same as the English in use today, and this is true of all languages and cultures. In Burgess's near dystopian future, which was written at the height of the Cold War, the slang of Alex and his droogs make it clear that the Soviets are either in power in the UK, having invaded it, or at the very least have become culturally more significant, so much so that their language is now being readily incorporated by the people of a staunchly Western country. The novel's first-person narration is crucial to its unsettling atmosphere. Alex's voice is charismatic, playful, and disturbingly eloquent, making his violent acts feel almost poetic. His speech is filled with ironic detachment, dark humour, and a twisted sense of refinement, which contrasts sharply with the brutality he freely inflicts on often completely innocent victims. This juxtaposition, elegance and savagery, creates a deeply unsettling tone, forcing readers to grapple with their own reactions and conscience at his behaviour. The atmosphere is oppressive and claustrophobic, reflecting the dystopian society Alex inhabits. The setting is a bleak, authoritarian world, possibly communist, where youth rebellion clashes with state control. The Korova milk bar, where Alex and his gang gather, is a surreal, drug-infused space that sets the tone for the novel's distorted reality. The streets are filled with danger, and the government's presence looms ominous, reinforcing themes of surveillance and forced conformity. Ultimately, Burgess's writing style is a masterful blend of linguistic innovation, musicality, and psychological depth. The novel's atmosphere is both electrifying and suffocating, pulling readers into a world where violence, control, and free will collide in a disturbing symphony of chaos. The central theme of the novel is free will versus control. It explores whether morality can exist without choice, questioning the ethics of forcing moral compliance upon individuals and removing their agency. Alex embodies the tension between personal freedom and societal order. His violent tendencies are unchecked until the state intervenes, stripping him of his ability to choose. The Ludovico technique near instantly turns him from a lion into a lamb. A once bold and vivid individual is made into a passive, helpless being. Burgess presents this as a fundamental violation of human nature, arguing that true morality must always come from within rather than being imposed from without. The nature of evil and redemption is another key theme. Alex is unapologetically violent, yet his charisma and intelligence make him a compelling character. His love for classical music, particularly Beethoven, contrasts with his brutality, creating a paradoxical personality. The novel suggests that evil is an inherent part of human nature, and removing it artificially diminishes a person's humanity. The final chapter presents Alex's eventual rejection of violence, implying that change will often come naturally rather than through any coercion. State power and authoritarianism are heavily scrutinized. The government in the novel prioritizes order over individual rights and is clearly considering using psychological conditioning as a regular tool of control on segments of society. The Minister of the Interior represents the state's willingness to sacrifice personal freedom. The novel critiques totalitarianism, showing how the government manipulates individuals for political gain. Alex becomes a pawn in a larger struggle between opposing factions, highlighting the dangers of state intervention in personal morality. Youth rebellion and societal decay are reflected in the novel's depiction of delinquency. Alex and his gang, the Droogs, embody the chaos of unchecked youth, engaging in violent acts without remorse. Their behaviour reflects Burgess's concerns about the rising crime and breakdown of traditional values. The novel suggests that societal decay stems from both individual recklessness and institutional failure, as the government's response to crime is equally disturbing. Upon its publication in 1962, the novel received mixed reviews. Some critics praised its highly original and innovative use of language and its exploration of free will, while others were disturbed by its graphical depiction of violence. Early reviews often focused on the novel's challenging content, with some questioning whether its violent scenes were gratuitous and overshadowed its themes. The Times literary supplement accused Burgess of using a serious social issue for frivolous purposes, while The Spectator praised the novel's technical inventiveness but found the plot somewhat arbitrary and contrived. In the United States, the reception was generally more positive than in Britain. American critics admired Burgess's Joycean linguistic creativity, with The Washington Post praising the novel's brilliance and Tulsa World noting its ability to keep readers engaged despite its violent subject matter. However, the novel was not an immediate commercial success. By the mid-60s, it had sold a mere 3,872 copies. But its notoriety grew significantly after Stanley Kubrick's 1971 film adaptation, which propelled the book into mainstream cultural discourse. Kubrick's film, while critically acclaimed, was also highly controversial. It too was accused of glorifying violence, leading to public outcry and even reports of copycat crimes. In response, Kubrick withdrew the film from circulation in the UK for several decades. This controversy further cemented A Clockwork Orange as a cultural touchstone and an instant cult classic, with Burgess frequently called upon to defend both his novel and Kubrick's adaptation. Despite Burgess's own frustrations with the novel's overshadowing of his other works, A Clockwork Orange remains his most famous book by far. It has evolved from a controversial cult novel into a literary classic, studied in universities and referenced commonly in popular culture. Its impact on dystopian fiction is undeniable, influencing works like Fight Club, American Psycho, and even modern cyberpunk narratives. It is still frequently included in lists of the greatest English language novels, and its themes about morality, government intervention, and personal autonomy are more relevant than ever. This novel has always loomed large on the horizon, especially in the UK during the 20th century, which was large part due to its controversy, which gave it a cult appeal. And that controversy was increased largely due to the film adaptation, which was a highly stylized Kubrick offering that, along with its banned status in the UK, made it instantly alluring to teenagers and young adults. But due to the abrupt tonal change midway through in both novel and film, many readers and viewers found the book and the film hard going after the initial rush of Alex's antisocial escapades, when the subsequent reckoning with the law is much greyer and bleaker and much more hard to stomach. Most saw the novel as a commentary on how violent youth was becoming more commonplace as a result of the glorification of violence and a breakdown in moral values. Looking at A Clockwork Orange in the 21st century, there's a definite shift in how the book and the film is now perceived within the context of society and human civilization as a whole. The novel was standardized on both sides of the Atlantic in the mid-80s, and the film was unbanned at the turn of the century. The violence contained within both pales in comparison to the graphic acts that are standard fare now in both action and horror of both types of medium. Where the book now stands out for me is in its second and third acts. What was once seen as the uncomfortable and boring or confusing part by many is actually now its most potent element. Alex is subjected in mind conditioning by the state. The state seeks to forcibly change his nature and thoughts for the sake of their own cynical agenda, under the pretense of making society safer. In both Western and Eastern societies today, we are seeing more and more controlling measures under the promise of making our society safer. Back when Burgess wrote the novel at the beginning of the 1960s, a person could disappear and assume a completely different persona if they wanted to, and the police would respect their anonymity even from worried family members. Today, in most modern countries, your every move is tracked. You are watched when you walk the streets by CCTV cameras, tracked in and out of bus and train stations by your electronic accounts, and monitored on the motorways by license plate recognition cameras. Even your online movements are being increasingly restricted and monitored. The power of AI and biometric data is being leveraged to further enhance the physical and mental lockdown of a supposedly free society by a government that is meant to represent and serve them. How long before citizens' DNA is registered upon birth, or a brain implant is first incentivized and then enforced? How long before your daily behavior is confined purely to the boundaries that the authorities have mandated as acceptable? How long before you or your loved ones are subjected to the pre-programmed Pavlovian response that Alex suffers when you or they step out of line? For my money, A Clockwork Orange has never been more relevant. So what are your thoughts on this cult novel? Which moment did you find the most engaging? And which element of the theme spoke to you personally? Once more, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that bell icon for more deep dives into the world of literature. Until next time, keep reading, and remember, if your friends invite you out for a bit of the old ultra-violence, then perhaps it's best to simply tell them that you have a cold and can't come out to play. Until next time, happy polyloggies. Vidi well, my droogs.